What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving my recap, reaction, and review of the 4th episode of the FX Sci-Fi Horror Series, Alien Earth. And just so you guys know, this video will contain mild spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time, let's get into it. So far, overall, I think this series has been just on the right side of okay. Last episode was nearly completely character-driven, as in there wasn't much action to be had, and I felt like it's slowing the story to a crawl. And with this episode taking us to the midpoint of the season by episode's end, I'm hoping to get some answers that shed some light on where exactly it is that this thing is headed. Because the midpoint is typically where people will either buckle up for the second half of the story or tap out entirely. I'm hoping that we get something here that makes me truly interested in seeing this story all the way to the season's conclusion. But I guess we'll wait and see. Now, episode 4, entitled Observation, starts with Wendy waking from her episode at the end of last episode to find herself in the lab where she was created, surrounded by Dame, Kirsch, Boy, and eventually even her brother Joe, as they all try to figure out what caused her episode in the first place. And it's here that we realize, in fact, that Wendy can hear the xenomorphs, that they, in fact, can communicate. And she explains to Boy that he shouldn't have been experimenting on the xenomorphs, and this causes Boy to get really excited. And it's funny because Curly is in the room as well, and he makes it clear that now Wendy's his favorite again, which seems to bother Curly. Again, we talked about Boy's manipulative nature when it comes to his AI lost boys and kind of how he's pitting them against each other. And up until now, I was not entirely convinced that Wendy could hear the Xenos. I instead felt that maybe she could feel what they were feeling. But here we actually do get the answer. And yes, in fact, she can hear them. And I don't like this. It makes the Xenomorphs a little less scary, in my opinion. Up to this point in the Alien franchise, they've kind of been portrayed essentially as just pure unadulterated killing machines. But here we learn that not only can they talk, but that they seem intelligent at that. And to be honest with you guys, I'll never look at the Xenomorphs quite the same again. Now, next we see Morrow as he continues to manipulate Slightly into bringing him a Xenomorph egg, explaining to Slightly that the egg belongs to him already, so it wouldn't be stealing to get one back for him. But we then see that Kirsch may realize that something might be up with Slightly because he enters his quarters and explains to him the significance of the 3 wise monkeys on his wall. And for those of you guys who don't know off the top of your heads, the 3 wise monkeys represents a Japanese pictorial maxim that embodies the principle of simply avoiding negative influence by refusing to see, hear, or speak of evil or wrongdoing. And while it originated to promote moral conduct and purity, in more modern usage, it can also imply willful ignorance or a deliberate turning of the back, to wrongdoing. Something that people would probably not, be in line with, especially liberals, not be in line with in this day and age, right? Now, next we get a chance to see the eyeball alien in action in the lab as it attacks the sheep, essentially gouging out one of its eyes and replacing it, and eventually ultimately controlling the sheep, apparently mind, body, and soul. The sheep literally stands up on its hind legs like it's a human being. Super duper creepy. Now, from there, we catch up with Dame and her husband, Arthur, as they have a frank conversation about the implications of what they've done in the creation of Wendy and the Lost Boys. And while they're talking, Nibs suddenly appears, interrupting their conversation and claiming that she's pregnant. So she goes into Dame's office and they have a conversation about how babies are made, that she can't possibly be pregnant, but Nibs insists that she is with child despite Dame's rebuttals. Dame then asks her what happened at the towers, and Nibs remembers being attacked by the eyeball alien, eventually threatening Dame with violence before security is finally called to escort Nibs back to her room. And this is where seeing what the eyeball alien can do, with the sheep, was important, because now we can maybe start to at least imagine how the attack may have affected Nibs by the same eyeball alien when they went to the towers over this episode and the last few episodes as well. We can kind of get a better understanding that the eyeball alien, even though Nibs is synthetic, that the eyeball alien may have done something to her that's kind of making her glitch somehow, or just kind of interrupting, the processes by which, she operates. Now, next we see Adam Ines and Joe having a conversation about Wendy's personhood and what Joe may owe the Prodigy Corporation for replacing his damaged lung with a manufactured one. And at the end of that conversation, Joe agrees to Prodigy's terms, officially making him an employee, with his purpose being to assess his sister, going forward, to kind of, assure her well-being and that kind of thing. Again, because we starting to see that Wendy is truly maybe the most important of the synthetics, especially now that she's shown Boy Cavalier that she can communicate with the Xenomorphs, right? She's back in the number one spot. And then we see Boy having a conversation with Wendy about how he has treated the Xenomorphs and what Yutani may have wanted with them. Now, Wendy explains that they should send the Xenos back to where they came from. Keep that in mind. And Boy threatens to send Joe back to New Siam if Wendy doesn't cooperate. And Wendy begs him not to do it. So Wendy ultimately ends up agreeing to help Boy discern what the aliens are saying, and in return, he agrees to let Joe stay, which would make Wendy happy. So you can see that Prodigy is attacking both Joe and Wendy simultaneously, playing on their familial bond, as Adam Ines gets Joe to agree to the company's terms by threatening his access to Wendy by threatening to send him home, and explaining that if he gets sent home that he would never see his sister again. And at the same time, Boy is essentially doing the same thing in reverse to Wendy in order to get her to help him learn the aliens' language, so to speak. Now, next, we see Kirsch and Toodles continuing to analyze the sheep in the lab, and he asks Kirsch if he can change his name from Toodles to Isaac, after Sir Isaac Newton, because he wants to be taken seriously as a scientist, and he doesn't think Toodles is a name befitting a grown man. Now, Kirsch eventually agrees, and Toodles excitedly exits the lab, only to find Slightly just outside. Now, Slightly, nervous, tells Toodles that Arthur needs something from the lab. Toodles asks him what, but Slightly panics before leaving suddenly. And Slightly then goes and makes contact again with Morrow and explains that there's no way for him to steal the egg that he wanted. Morrow is disappointed in Slightly's decision and informs him that he has his mother, and that he plans to also take his brothers hostage as well as soon as they get home from school. Now, he explains further that instead of taking an egg out of the lab, that he is to take someone inside the lab instead, that the egg will hatch and the face hugger inside will attach to the person's face, and that when the face hugger falls off, that he should then bring the person to him. And while this conversation is happening, we see that Kirsch is listening to the whole thing. And then Kirsch then enters the lab after hearing the conversation and the unit housing the eggs, and he starts to examine them, based off of what he's heard. And here, we see that Kirsch doesn't just suspect that something's up with Slightly, like he may have thought at the beginning of the episode, but that he's actually monitoring Slightly's communications, which makes perfect sense in this scenario. I can absolutely see that all the Lost Boys, including Wendy, would be monitored. And this also sets up a confrontation of sorts where Kirsch will be able to head Slightly off at the pass. And I just kind of wonder what that might look like. And we also see Kirsch go and examine the eggs, because he's thinking, well, why would the eggs open when someone enters the room? They're still in the process of trying to figure out exactly what makes these eggs tick, exactly what makes the face huggers tick, the Xenomorphs. They're still trying to figure out all this stuff. And so, of course, we also think about, well, if he's got to bring a person into the lab, who would he bring? And my guess is that he would bring Joe, because he's the only person, other than Boy, Dame, and her husband. I mean, who else are people and not synthetics, right? Now, next we find Wendy spending time with her brother and the rest of the Lost Boys. And Curly asks Joe about the five, and he explains to them who that is, about the five companies, that they will likely step in and help Utani get her property back from Prodigy. Slightly arrives and asks why Joe is with them. Wendy explains to Slightly that Joe is her brother, and Slightly explains that he has brothers too, remarking that Wendy isn't the boss of them. Now, Joe agrees that all of their families should be able to be there with them as well. And at the end of the conversation, Wendy, who kind of feels attacked, decides to just get up and go to the lab. Now, after that, we see Joe's damaged lung in the case inside the lab. Remember, this is the lung that they placed the xenomorph zygote in, and Wendy's staring at it. She then begins communicating with the xenomorph zygote, as we see Joe in his quarters examining the scar from his surgery as Slightly surveils him from just outside of his quarters. So we do see that Slightly is looking at, Joe being the person he takes in there and sacrifices to the face huggers. Now, Wendy begins to sing to the baby Xeno, and the lung begins to pulsate as Kirsch watches carefully from just outside the room. See, monitoring, right? And suddenly, a xenomorph snake-like thing explodes from the lung, breaking the glass as Wendy, takes cover. And after Wendy realizes that she is unharmed by the event, she communicates with the xeno snake-like thing, and it eventually allows her to even touch it, unharmed, which seems to concern Kirsch. And that's when the episode cuts to black. And here we actually get to see what Wendy can do as it pertains to xeno communication, right? That it's almost like she can give them instructions. We also see a different version of the xenomorph, one that looks more like a snake than the typical xenomorph, which I don't find particularly helpful at all. Because now we're trying to integrate another subspecies of alien on top of all the other species we've already seen so far in the series, and it just feels like we're just buying time until we get back to what makes the Alien franchise so iconic, that being pure, unmitigated xenomorph carnage. That's what we're really here to see, right? Nothing really else. Now, overall, I give this episode a 60% or a 6.0 if you're thinking IMDb score. And look, this was yet another episode full of exposition. And look, I get it, but it's starting to feel like we're just treading water at this point, right? And this tells me that maybe, just maybe, the filmmakers didn't have enough content for an entire series, which leads me to ask the very stupid question, why they even attempted to make a series involving a franchise that has been all movies to this point in the first place, right? And guys, this is what my fear was to begin with, that this series would not be able to come up with an alien story that would fit into the framework of a television series and still do the franchise justice. And when you add on top of that, the fact that this is an original story that's being shoehorned into already existing alien lore, and that story takes place before all of the events covered in the 7 now alien films. Because look, this isn't a TV series that anyone was asking for. This was kind of just, hoisted upon us and like, hey, have this and like it. And look, guys, I'm all for character development. As I typically write character-driven drama screenplays myself, that's typically my bread and butter, right? Character-driven, dramatic, film, TV, web series content is what I write. It's what I'm best at writing. So I get the character-driven stuff, right? But this is just, the small writing here in this show, it isn't bad, right? I'm not going to even cap. It's not bad. But it's the larger writing, I think, that is ultimately letting all the air out of the story. It's the arc that we're following over the course of episode after episode after episode after episode. And with that being the case, I gotta say, where this series is concerned, I find myself dangerously close to just tuning this whole thing out. But what do you guys think? Have you had the chance to watch the 4th episode of Alien Earth yet? If you have, what do you think about the story's pacing? What do you think about the xenomorphs having the ability to speak? And what do you think about Wendy being able to control them? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, feel free to subscribe to my new Shorts channel for additional content. The link is in the description. In addition to that, be sure to go check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.